This is Inspector Gadget. And this is a little motor which I'm going to put into that model. That's right, this dude has a propeller on the top of his head because he is, in fact, Inspector Gadget and can do some pretty crazy things. And I'm gonna make that propeller spin because I can. Oh yes, and I'm also gonna obviously paint the model. This video was also, oh god damn it. This video was sponsored by CA 3D Studios, but I will tell you more about them later, but for now...
Inspector Gadget is basically what happens when you give a clueless man a $1,000 trench coat and $1 million in body mods. He's a bumbling cyborg detective from the 1980s cartoon by the same name, who's got every gadget imaginable: helicopter hat, spring-loaded legs, extendable arms, and zero idea how to use any of them properly. Despite technically being the hero, he solves exactly none of the cases. The real brains of the operation, his genius niece Penny, and their traumatized but determined dog, Brain, who spend every episode cleaning up Inspector Gadget's mess while he takes all the credit. Their main villain is Dr. Claw, a mysterious guy with a metal hand, a cat, and a serious desk-punching issue. It's part spy spoof, part cartoon chaos, and 100% nostalgic nonsense. Basically, if RoboCop met Johnny English, then you'd end up with Inspector Gadget.
Now, since I'm going to be doing something quite ridiculous with this model, I'm going to skip a couple of things. For example, the preparation and all the rest of that stuff. So we'll just move them aside for now while I figure out how I'm going to do this. This is a little geared brushed motor, and I'm going to be using this because those little gears in there actually slow down the motor so that it doesn't spin like a freaking crazy horse. And so if I power this little thing by using a red and a black wire, it doesn't have to be red or black, but just two wires specifically, and I placed each of these wires onto the ends of the battery, I will have, in fact, a spinning motor, which you probably can't see, but I can show you how you can see it, and that is by actually placing the top portion of this thing onto the motor, in which case you'll be able to see my plans, which is to make a helicopter spin at the top of Gadget Man's head. Now, I'm going to be honest, on the face of it, that seems pretty simple and pretty easy. Just shove a battery in, stick the motor, and off you go. Unfortunately, that motor has to fit somewhere in between here and here. And these things clearly do not have a motor-shaped hole in any of them, so I'm going to need to make that. And I'm just going to do that by drilling it out and cutting out as much as I possibly can to try and fit that motor in. It's not going to be pretty, but the end result is what I care about. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just cut this knob off. I know I'm going to need it to locate it in the top of the hat, but also I don't care. I need the hole because I need to stick in a motor in there. Also, I absolutely hate working with these, and so because of that, I need to make sure I'm wearing these glasses because I don't want to lose my eyeballs. And now what I'm going to do is drill a hole through the top because that's where the shaft of this little motor is going to need to come out from. But I need to actually see how far away it is so that I can decide how much I need to recess this to stick this motor in. Now I think the next easiest step is to line this up with the key because that will make the most sense for fitting it into its place. And I'm just going to draw around the edge of this thing so that I have the exact shape, and then I can cut this out as best as I possibly can. What I was saying is you need to film this is because I'm going to plug this power in. One of us might lose an eye. I'm just saying. That's so dumb. And so cool at the same time. Now, I just need to glue an LED into the space where his eyeball is so that I can have a light coming out of his friggin' eyeball. From the references, he has clearly got a glowing eyeball, so I'm gonna give him a glowing eyeball because I can. I also cut an access hole in the bottom of the torso, which kind of made the torso a bit wobbly, so if you do this, it's not my fault, but at the same time I increased the voltage, which meant that the fact that I hadn't glued the propellers to his head meant that they went flying everywhere, but we don't have to worry about that. By the way, I masked off his eyeball with some blue tack and started painting the model. So it is currently an entire day later, which explains my change in attire, but I'm done with the preparation of this model, and now it's time to get on to painting it and hope for the best. So there are a couple of bits that need to be painted with white. This is in order to give them their zenithal, but also because some parts are actually white. So I'm gonna give that a little bit of a paint now, and then we'll move on to actually doing the base. Then we'll start working systematically through things. I do actually still need to figure out how I'm gonna put a switch into his body, because once I put the battery in, it's gonna be too hard to get it out again later. So this is something I need to prepare for. But before I try to figure any of that out, I'm gonna tell you about the sponsor of this week's video, which is CA3D Studios. And for as little as $15 a month, you can get files just like this Inspector Gadget, which comes from their cybernetic pack, which they've just released, which is a bundle of the models that they have had released over the last few months or so on their own Patreon. And of course, they've now put it into one glorious pack, which you can purchase and have every single one of these models for yourself. Now I'm going to leave a link for them in the description, so of course if you are interested in any of the 3D models that you saw, or particularly the one that I'm painting in this video, then maybe you want to go check it out in the description and go look for that pack for yourself. Tell them that I sent you. And now let's get back into painting the model. Now obviously I have laid down the layers of pinkle and red ink over this model, and the next steps is to take some sunny skin tone and spray it over the face so that I've got some form of a skin tone. Actually, I did put brown rose before that, but you would have seen it in the background during the ad read. Now, of course, it's time to add a highlight, and that I do using highlight skin. Before the highlights, I did use Orcish Dermis to bring some saturation back to the skin, but I find that even though I do that, it's still too desaturated, so I use a yellow glaze to bring some saturation back in again. I'm then going to take some Guilliman Flesh, which is kind of like a reddish browny color, and I'm going to spray that into the sides of his temples and into the shadows to make him look a little bit more rugged, of course. Now I'm going to take a lighter grey and spray that into the highlighted areas of his suit. This is kind of a grey model in general, so I'm going to make sure I use different greys while I do this. But for his pants, which are obviously not grey, they're a bluey kind of color, and in order to keep it kind of semi-realistic, I'm going to add this Luftwaffe grey over the top. This is a bluey grey, and it's going to work quite nice, but taking some Drakenhof Nightshade, I can spray that into the shadows, which will give me a nice deep dark blue color in the shadows, but it will also help to make it look like it's a little bit more desaturated and more of an Inspector Gadget-y kind of uniform. The color didn't feel quite blue enough to me, so I took Griff Charger Grey, which is blue, but it's mostly like a weird grey color, and I sprayed that over everything, giving the whole pair of pants a tint to the blue side. But now I'm going to move back to the trench coat, and I'm going to spray a lot more of a neutral kind of grey on that, which is a colder grey and not as blue. So this is going to take us away from that blue color of his pants, making sure they don't look too much of the same. Again, I was still not happy with the blue of his pants, and so I came back with this turquoise color and sprayed that from most of the shadows in order to tint them a lot more bluer than what they currently were. Now I can work on the mechanical parts of this body, which is super simple really. After they had a black primer layers, I can easily just dry brush a silver over the top, and in this case this is just going to make it look like they have been shaded, because all the black stays into the recesses. Of course you can come back and tint this again later, but we'll talk about that if we get to that spot. His little propellers that are on the top of his head, by the way, I sprayed those with just a dark silver using my airbrush, because if you dry brush this area it would be quite visible and not look as smooth as just airbrushing it basically. I then took some liquid skill, which is basically a panel line wash, and I used that in select areas across some of these mechanical bits. This will go into the crevices and recesses and make it look like you've put some black in them, but you haven't though. I'm then now able to start working on the head part of this model, and I'm going to paint black over his mechanical neck part obviously, because I need to start that part from black. But while I'm here doing that, I might as well paint his hair, which itself is also black. For his boots I used a color called black grey, which I'm not sure could even be a color that I don't understand how this works, but I'm not going to argue it. It's kind of a bluey grey anyway, and this is going to go with his suit. Obviously the next step would be actually painting the base, which is kind of weird for me because normally I paint the base first so that I have somewhere to place my model as I start slowly painting bit by bit. Now I sprayed this base in the beginning of the video with a load of light colors to kind of make all that smoke stand out first, and then I came back and painted black over all the rocks, and now I'm going to dry brush them with some grays. But of course I felt like this was again it lacked too much color, so I came back with a brown and I sprayed that into the kind of creases and crevasses in between some of the rocks. And you can see this will overspray all over the place, but don't worry about this, we'll come back and sort this out later. But also because of all the smoky stuff and dust that's kind of going all over the place, it kind of fits in that there would be some overspray. I then dry brushed a deck tan highlights over the top edges of the rocks. This was to make them stand out nicely, and then went back in with some white over the top of the smoky stuff to kind of really show off the highest highlight parts of them. But all of this overspray going all over the place is good for the dust, and to really sell the fact that it's dusty, I use skeleton horde to tint some of the model, or at least some of the parts of this base of the model, into like a grimy browny sort of yellowy color. This helps to make the effect look like it is dust and not just overspray, because of course it is ultimately just overspray. I painted his glove black. This is because I'm setting it up for later when I'm going to paint it brown, but before I do that I will be getting distracted and having to take out the blue tack that I stuck in the eye for masking it earlier. I'm going to use some red ink over that eye, which wasn't really as bright as I thought it would be, but it's okay. That's because it's obviously got a dark void on the inside where the LED is, and when that comes on it'll be super bright anyway. I will come back and put a little highlight in there so it doesn't look so weird later on, but for now I'm gonna smash on those eyebrows. There's that little highlight that I was talking about, and this kind of just makes no sense when the model's on, but it makes sense when the model's off, and when the model is on then it's better than just leaving it, in my opinion. If you were going to paint this without putting an LED in, I would probably paint that eyeball white and then with the red ink, which would make it so much more pungent. But let's just move on before we get too confused with what we're doing. Remember when I said you can tint the surface of this metal? That is what I'm doing using the Griff Charger Grey, and that's just to give it a little bit more depth and make it not look so shiny and just black and silver. The next step is putting the model together, and this is the reason why I normally paint the bases first, because it gives me somewhere to put the model while it's drying, which is not really where it should be drying, but it's an easier way for me to do it. I can now start working on the torso section of this model, which means painting his white shirt, which of course we don't want to paint white because it would look really weird. So I use a color called deck tan because this color is not white. it's, I don't know, it's anything but white, but because of that, it just makes white things look a little bit better when you use this color for that. I then also painted his little buttons with dark silver, and of course, now that the white has dried and it's not white again, it's deck tan, I'm going to use Griff Charger Grey to shade that, and this gives us a look like a white t-shirt, because a white t-shirt is never truly white. The next steps after that is to obviously now paint his glove, which I used this brown, which by the way took a couple of layers. For some reason that brown just would not cover that black, but it did eventually, and I used some Griff Charger Grey and a little bit of black mixed together to paint the insides of his sleeves to make them look a little bit deeper. I took some Magos purple and painted that over his lips, because everybody needs some scrumdiddlyumptious lips. Using some dark vermilion, I'm gonna paint, there is a red section on his gat on his arm, and so I'm going to use that red to paint that. That also took probably 2 layers of that color. Now I'm going to start working on his eye, and I used highlight skin to paint the sclera, and then I researched what color his eyes were, and the research came back and told me they were gray. So I painted his eyes, the first iris I've ever done, in gray, and I used the dark gray first, then a light gray to give it a little bit of a highlight, with obviously a black pupil, and then a lovely little specular highlight with white paint. And then I can take the wires from his head and feed them through his body and check that everything works before I actually move on to putting this on top of the model. Almost forgot though that there is a newspaper on the base, and so I quickly printed a decal, which I printed on water slide transfer paper on my normal printer, and then I stuck that down, and I was able to now call this model done. I hope you enjoyed this video. We are now getting to the end of it, and if you did see this video, there was 2 of these videos by the way. This is the full painting video, and another one was a much shorter one, which is about half the length of this video, and that is just building the model basically. I want to say a massive thank you if you've watched any of these videos, or if you've watched both of them. Either way, leave some comments. The whole point of posting 2 videos was just to see whether one got more retention than the other. And of course, with retention comes attention, and I would like you to give me your attention by clicking the subscribe button, because if you gave me 1 more subscriber, I will be 1 more subscriber bigger, which is fantastic for me. I want to say a massive thank you to my Patreons, of course, more importantly than anything else, because they're the ones who keep the lights blinding my eyeballs. And over on my Patreon now, you are receiving a model a month, depending on what tier you're in. There is extra content, there is extra videos, there is behind the scenes photos, works in progress pictures. There is just so much there. Go and check it out. If it's something you want to see or do or join or be part of, well then do that, of course. Click subscribe, click like, and tell your mom I said hi. By the way, this is the end of a video, and when I end my videos, I tell you how I feel, and how I truly feel is if you don't like it, I don't care, and you can now cough.